A Louisiana runoff that was a 17-point blowout is suddenly a single-digit knife fight, and Democrats are circling like there's a lane in it. This is Senate Pickup Watch. Today, that Louisiana tightening, fresh Iowa daydreams, and what Trump's endorsement machine is doing to the whole map.
And whether a closer poll in a low-density red state means anything at all. Let's start in Louisiana. Follow the show, and the next briefing lands in your feed on its own.
Here's Fox 8 News.
New polls ahead of Saturday's Senate runoffs show a tighter gap between Republican candidates John Fleming and Julia Letlow than after the primary election. Letlow led the primary by about 17 points, but Fox 8 political analyst Mike Sherman said the new polls now mostly show a closer race between Fleming and Letlow.
So Letlow was up 17 after the primary, and now Fox 8's analyst says most polls have this thing inside a few points. Fleming's even touting a JMC poll with him up 5.
And who paid for the poll with Fleming up 5? Fleming. Letlow's guy admits he's buying a poll every single week. So I'd be careful calling this pure tightening. Both camps are spraying numbers.
Right. Sherman basically says it out loud. Campaign polls are slanted by who you ask and how you ask it. The Independent reads right after the primary all had Letlow on top.
But the part that makes me pause is this. Even the Independent stuff in a low-density red state like Louisiana, I'd read those with way more skepticism than people tend to. The inputs are soft. A messy GOP runoff is exactly where the polling gets noisy.
And Sherman pins Letlow's lead on one thing, Trump's endorsement. That's the same wall we've been talking about all week with Ricketts walking out of Nebraska at 81%. The endorsement is the whole ballgame in these primaries. CNBC with Justin Papp.
Democrats have high hopes for Iowa in the 2026 midterm elections, with competitive races in both the House and Senate, as well as for governor. Iowa is a former swing state that President Barack Obama won twice before it took a decidedly rightward turn in more recent elections.
What catches me about this Iowa story is the framing. Obama won it twice. Yeah, he did. And then it went hard right after that. So when CNBC ties the hope to Trump's approval sagging, I'd push back. That rightward turn came from a working-class realignment that stuck, not just a Trump mood swing.
And Connie Klug, the ex-Republican in Adel hosting a kitchen table roundtable. Lovely human story, real disaffection. But a roundtable down a dirt road isn't a turnout operation. Sarah Trone Garriott, a state senator, has a fighting chance in a House district. Fine, but the headline says Senate, too. And I want to see a first-quarter in-state fundraising haul before anybody sells me Iowa as a Senate pickup.
Right, and the tell is the verbs. High hopes, fighting chance, promising opportunities. Those are mood words. Iowa is exactly the state where the realignment is best documented. So, Trump approval sags, therefore Iowa moves, is reading nostalgia as structure. Louisiana hasn't sent a Democrat to the Senate in decades. So if the real story right now is Republicans fighting each other, what would actually have to break right for this to become a genuine Democratic pickup and not just a GOP soap opera?
Yeah, that's the right way to frame it. Because for Democrats, this only gets interesting if a few very specific things happen. Start with the math. Julia Letlow led the May primary 45-28 over State Treasurer John Fleming, per the Louisiana Illuminator. Since then, though, Tyler Bridges at The Advocate has reported signs that the June 27th Republican runoff is a lot closer, with Fleming competitive even though he's been badly outspent and doesn't have Trump's endorsement. Democrats have their own runoff, too, between Jamie Davis and Gary Crockett. So if you're looking for a Democratic opening, it starts with a wounded Republican nominee, either someone who barely survives a nasty runoff or someone who drags real baggage from that fight into November. Then the Democrat would have to consolidate black voters in New Orleans and Baton Rouge and make some suburban inroads, which is a huge lift in a state that votes heavily Republican federally. And the experts in the Advocate piece are still blunt. Whoever wins the GOP runoff is the overwhelming favorite in November.
If Fleming pulls off the upset over Letlow despite being outspent and without Trump's blessing, does that actually make him a weaker general election candidate? Or does his anti-establishment energy just get redirected outward?
That's the thing to watch. If Fleming wins, he'd be the guy who beat Trump's preferred pick by running against the grain, and that could make coalition building harder in the general. Stephanie Grace at The Advocate wrote that the race could be going off script. In that kind of mess, Democrats would need every small edge to stack up: turnout, a strong nominee, a nationalized environment. After June 27th, I want to see whether the losing side's voters actually come home. From Stephen Fowler at NPR.
Since his first term in office began in 2017, Trump has offered his seal of approval more than 1,000 times in House, Senate, and governor's races. An NPR analysis of who Trump endorsed and when, and what happened in those races, sheds new light on how Trump has evolved as kingmaker in the Republican Party.
Here's the number that matters out of this NPR piece. Over 1,000 endorsements since 2017, and the strategy now is to drop them early and clear the field for incumbents in safe seats. That's the wall Osborne slammed into in Nebraska. Ricketts walks out of that primary at 81.5%. He didn't need a heroic campaign sprint. The Truth Social post made the primary basically free.
And that's sitting behind everything we've talked about today. A Trump endorsement helps a guy win, sure, but it also prevents the messy primary that might have softened him up for November. Which loops right back to the Louisiana thing we just hit. The runoff's tightening, but even Trump's Letlow endorsement hasn't fully settled Fleming versus Letlow. If that endorsement starts to bite, the lane closes.
If you're tracking Senate pickups, you might also like California governor's race. Daily 2026 coverage of the candidates, polling, debates, fundraising, and policy beyond the horse race takes. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts. What we're watching next: Saturday's Louisiana runoff. That tells us which Republican advances to the November Senate ballot. As always, we've put links to every story we mentioned in the show notes, so if one of them caught your ear, you can dig in there. That's Senate Pickup Watch for today. This is a Lantern podcast.